I'm going to begin with a semi-humorous point, and it's actually a question to Christina. Christina, you and I were exchanging comments during that session. So are you leaving us at 5:30 on the dot? Right.
I believe yes.
We're leaving us at 5:30 or 7:30 your time or
7:30.
right. So it's interesting, isn't it, that I've chosen there the present continuous form based on a conversation where you told me that you actually have a particular arrangement. You have to be somewhere immediately after this session, if I understand correctly.
Yes, I do. I'm having dinner with it's my friends, and I have to make it. It's something set all the time, every Friday afternoon. That's what we do at the end of a long weekend. It's always in my diary.
So you might expect me to follow that up, because I'm always interested in people living in different countries and their cuisine. And I might ask you a question about the kind of food. So what question do you anticipate that I might now ask you for you to answer with information about the restaurant or the cuisine type that is on the cards for this evening? So of course I don't know whether this is fixed or whether it's just something you're going to decide spontaneously when you meet your friends.
Fixed, super fixed. The dinner is fixed, but what I am going to eat is not fixed. It depends on how hungry I shall be at that time.
So I could perhaps be asking, where are you eating? Because I think you know the restaurant.
Definitely.
But I then might say, well, what do you think you're going to order?
Exactly, and that's what Doreen in the chat added also. Which food are you going to order is the right one? I don't know. I know food will I know food will be devoured, and exactly which one I am going to order is I have an idea at the back of my head, but the decision hasn't been made yet. So it's a possibility yet.
So very much there, I think, a demonstration of the fact that grammar is contextually driven. Grammar is often a question of choice, and that we owe it to our learners to move away from a sense of you use this form here, you know, the rule-driven approach, perhaps particularly for something as nebulous, as not as vague as anything in the future. So this dinner tonight, it's you. Who else?
Two of my friends, two of my longtime friends. We are going we're going to this restaurant around the corner. We always eat there. We even have our own special little booth. This is in my head. It's the way I view the event, because like you mentioned, it's all about how we view the perspective. And for me, it's a very set thing.
What about your partner? Is it you and your friend, or is he coming too?
It's me and my friend. My partner knows that under no circumstances, after a certain time, I am gone. He knows that it is a set. My daughter knows that. My partner knows that. Everybody who knows me knows that it is completely adultly set. So, because that's how it is.
Your partner won't be joining you. Right. Okay. Interesting. So on the one hand, we've got this a range of choices regarding future form, which relate to both the event itself, but perhaps also our perception of the event. Now, sounds to me that this dinner that you have, I think, is a weekly event.
There's a weekly event. It is my
Right.
way to completely relax.
Fantastic. Are the people who attend the event, is that completely fixed as well? Or sometimes are there some people joining and other people not?
Ah, the numbers are fixed. The people are
So
fixed.
when I get invited to your house, do I get invited to join you on this Friday event?
Depends on how much you want to go and talk to three women about how certain places where we used to work are horrible. Not
Right.
sure you're going to enjoy it.
So I might think, well, on the one hand, if I, when I come and visit you, I might say to our mutual friend, Steve, oh, I'm having dinner with Christina and her friends. But there's an element of doubt there. So I might actually say to Steve, well, I'm going to see Christina, but I'm not sure whether I'm there for the Friday night dinner. So I'm going to see her at the weekend, but I don't know when.
Exactly. You're going to.
Right.
That's definitely, you're going to see me. Now, it's not fixed because there's this element of will I, won't I? Again, another way to view it. So definitely the are going to is going to be the one that you might want to choose.
So it's interesting, isn't it, that I think for certain learners, sort of certain users of English, that these options, these choices, they come naturally because it's a language that they've grown up with. Now you're an interesting case, aren't you, as a bilingual? So for you, your perception of future forms in English, do you feel your way as a native user of English, or do you more have a kind of a, a post proficiency learner of English approach to futurity?
Well, the thing is that I went to England when I was around 11, which
Right.
according to certain theories before the critical age, whether or not that theory has been debunked depends on your point.
Well, people are not sure at the moment, I think it's
Exactly. They're like, not sure. So the way I view language and the way I view English is basically it's just I feel it.
right.
While eating, it depends completely on my perspective. There's no rules being applied. However, as a teacher, I do find myself kind of reflecting post sentence on, well, that was interesting why you use that. But yes, it's more of a post event, post linguistic event reflection
Right.
than a pre.
Okay. So I think it's interesting, isn't it, for people like us who have this kind of instinctive feel that we're actually, I think, in many respects at a disadvantage from the majority of teachers whose English has come as a result of years and years of hard study. But something that we all share is the challenge of learners who find future forms really, really difficult. And also, we all get faced with those questions where we just stop and think, oh, hang on a minute. Why is this right? Is this not right? Is it not? So I was going to ask you about the causes of some of the challenges that students have with future forms. But before we move on to that, perhaps if we could look together at a question that has come in into chat, I think from Dowden. Can we have this sentence as an example? People are sitting on Christmas saying 2024, a better year than 2023. Ah, okay.
Yeah.
So we're looking forward to the following year, and as all of us, 2023 wasn't bad, but we always want better. What's your sense?
2023 was excellent compared to 2022.
2023 is going to be a better year. 2024 is going to be. 2024 will be. What are your thoughts on that? And is this a rule or is this a perception in your answer?
Well, the teacher in me sees that and goes, prediction based on facts, prediction based on feelings, will or going to, which one? The optimist in me, yes, the optimist in me think that Christmas is going to be a better year than 2023. It's a fact, of course. 2024 will be is going to be a better year because I base it on my optimism and on feeling that things can only get better. So yes, there's this dichotomy in most of us, is that sometimes we feel like we want to say something, but at the same time we have the rules at the back of our head and we're kind of thinking, ooh, which one would be better? And sometimes, like, I know for me it should be going to, but sometimes physically we'll say, will be better, as in it's an affirmation, it's a fact, I want it to be real. So that's completely depends on the perspective, and the rules are so manifold that you don't know which one to apply. And that's if there's an issue for us as teachers,
maybe it's the point that there isn't a rule. It's about the perception of the speaker and the choice. If the language is being used accurately, we'll come back to accurate use in a moment. So in that respect, the question that Rolla asks, which is correct, is actually, sorry, Rolla, the wrong question. This is not a binary right or wrong. And this is the point about future forms and why future forms are so challenging. It's not about that's right, that's wrong, because it could be that both are correct, but they come out of, or they speak to, the different perception. So if we're making a statement of fact, if you're a politician and you want to convince people that you know what you're talking about, you're dealing with knowledge, 2024 will be the best year ever. I'm guaranteeing you that as a fact. So if you're talking about 2024 factually, you're going to be using will. If you think you've got some evidence, it's a bit like you look outside the window and you go, oh, bright sunshine, tomorrow's going to be a lovely day. Then you're going to be using going to based on a prediction based on evidence available to you. What evidence do we have of 2024 being better than 2023? Energy prices are beginning to fall. We think that, well, hopefully, exactly, there is our problem. So, Rolla, your point here is that there isn't a binary right-wrong. 2024 will be, 2024 is going to be, are both possible. And I think this is the problem, or the challenge of future forms, of which there are many. Dowden says, so much depends on the context and perception. Yeah, absolutely. Simazar's added will for future predictions. Yeah, if you think that 2020, we can predict 2024, then yes, why not will? But someone else might say going to be. Equally correct, just shows something about what's happening in that person's head. Great questions, everyone. Please keep them coming. Let's get back to the causes of error.
Prediction based on beliefs will, prediction based on facts, most probably visual, would be going to, and then afterwards, well, it's an affirmation, so shouldn't it be will? That's the thing, is that students and teachers also need to grasp, is that there isn't such a rule to apply at all times, and it makes learning so much harder. Is that we see it normally as, here are the rules, let's apply, and whatever is explicit knowledge will become implicit knowledge if we see it enough. But although explicit learning does work, but sometimes the rules are not there for us to learn. So it is quite difficult for learners.
So that's our first challenge. That's our first challenge then, and that was there in the top left-hand corner, the intrinsic difficulty of the future forms in English. And I think what we thought would be quite interesting is to perhaps address some of those challenges and think of ways in which we can help learners and teachers to overcome them. So in terms of the intrinsic difficulty of futurity in English, have you got any thoughts on how we can help teachers and to help their learners to deal with that intrinsic difficulty?
The problem is that when we start teaching about futurity, we tend to, at the beginning anyway, for elementary and pre-int, we tend to give them the rules. And then later on, as we grow, we are, as the learners grow and, develop to higher levels, we go, oh, well, yes, but we should be, in order to deal with that, we shouldn't be afraid to tell them the truth, which is, listen, when you were at a lower level, we told you a simple rule. It was not a lie. It was a simplified view of it. Now that you are at a high level, this is what we can tell you. And there should be a possibility, there should be acceptance of ambiguity at times. And although it's very, very difficult for learners, we need to be able to teach that. And this goes into one of the problems that you mentioned, which was the errors that come from teaching, that sometimes learners get misinformation from the teachers because somewhere, somehow, the teachers are not willing to tell them, there's no fast rule for this. We have to be able to address this ambiguity and this capacity for ambiguity, which learners detest.
I'm really interested in what you're saying about you start off with certainty and you move towards ambiguity. I'm not sure that I entirely agree. I wonder whether, and this is where the use of L1 comes in, whether we actually say to the students from the off, right from the start, a lot of teaching materials are course book driven, so probably most students will encounter the future form through a course book, and many of those course books are all in L2. Some are bilingual, many are not. So I guess as a teacher then we're confronted with an option. Do we present this as a de facto, this is English, this is the rule, or do we actually say from the beginning, what you're going to see is one way of talking about the future in English. There are others, and you need to keep an open mind. Now, I totally get what you're saying about the fact that students don't always like ambiguity. I'm actually learning Welsh at the moment. And one of the features of Welsh is the fact that the beginning of words change based on the words that come before them. So if you have the word in followed by a place, the place name may change based on the preposition in. So I was learning in my first ever lesson of Welsh how to say, where do you live? And the answer was, I live in Cardiff. And we were told, no, don't say in, just say Cardiff. Because there's going to be this problem with the changing of the beginning of the word if you use a preposition before it. And I was quite happy with that. I went, oh, okay. So if I say Caerdydd, Cardiff, that's one thing. But if I put in front of it, something's going to happen. I don't know what it is yet.
Something bad.
Something odd. Something like, I don't, and it was kind of like, and I was like, okay, I can go with this. So I guess all of our participants tonight, and us as teachers as well, we have choices. Do we say, this is the rule, we use this form as is in the course book, or do we sort of let students look through that veil and go, oh, there's more to this, but not yet? What do you think?
Well, that would be ideal. But the problem is that we have to see it from the teacher's point of view. And some teachers, I mean, I work in the Middle East, and some teachers do not want to relinquish the power that comes from this is the rule and this is how you apply it and I know everything. So that's also something we have to see, is that you know, this ability to say, well, it depends, and we'll see it later. This is something that we need to train our teachers to be able to be that open with our learners.
Right. So there's a context of the relationship between the teacher and her students or his students. There's a context of the cultural expectations of the learners and the role of the teacher. And then there's maybe the Ministry of Education context of what the ministry wants teachers to say, or what your head of department wants you to say. And therefore, maybe with something as complex as the intrinsic difficulty of futurity, it's enough to know that you have choices and to make a choice based on what's right for your learners in their context. So you and I can have two totally different views, but that's fine because our contexts might well be culturally different based on where we work and where we live. Okay, great. Okay, number 2, confusing meta language.
Oh, goodness.
When you are, because I know that you teach online all over the world, when you're teaching students in countries geographically similar to where you live, in the Lebanon, and they're low level, do you still do everything just in English, or do you also use a shared L1 if you have it with the learners in order to make your way through this meta language?
The problem is that twofold. Number one, my Arabic is absolutely atrocious.
Okay.
My daughter tells me to just shush and she'll translate for me. So that's not a possibility. I do understand receptive more than productive, as every low-level learner is. My knowledge is more receptive than productive. I have receptive mastery, no productive mastery. However, I do allow for L1 to be used within the classroom for when the language I use is simplified. So every complex meta language, like the grammatical terms like present simple or present continuous, tends to be put on the side. I try to avoid that until the end of the course. First, we look at the meaning, we look at the form, we look at the pronoun, and then at the end I mention, by the way, it's called, if you want to refer to it in the book. So meta language is something that is useful for referencing, but it is not a useful tool at the beginning of a lesson to say, oh, today we're going to see the present continuous, because it sets the expectation. Oh, present continuous, something happening right now. No, don't do that, because then if you start by doing this, then you have to fight against the tide. I know that explicit teaching.
I was going to say, plus, of course, the minute you go into a classroom and say, today we're going to do grammar, we're doing the present continuous for future, the students just switch off. I mean, it's just not very interesting, and it's actually not very useful. But if you couch your communicative purpose, today we're talking about the future, and how to express something that is agreed and in your diary. So, for example, making arrangements with your friends, the students immediately go, oh, okay, I get why this is useful for me now. Rowena, I think that's the name, has made Rowena Beltran-Quezada has raised a very interesting point about some of the challenges caused by the L1. And here we've both got an L1 interference issue, but we've also got a conceptual issue when people think about time in different ways. Rowena, I don't know if you'd like to switch your microphone on and come and tell us a little bit about the challenges that you face when you're teaching English to students in Japan. Rowena, I can see your image here on screen. If you'd like to switch your microphone on.
Hi, everyone.
Hi, Rowena.
Hi.
I'm sorry, I can't have video because it's 12:13 a.m. here in the Philippines. And well, thank you. I was able to make it. I'm sorry I came late. So, but yes, I've taught Japanese learners, and this is actually one of the lessons where I spend so much time explaining to them, because in the Japanese educational system, once they start learning English, it is really grammar based. And yes, and they still use grammar translation method at some point. And as far as communicative language teaching is concerned, there are still some challenges for teachers to use that as well. So a lot of my students would tend to say, I will be going, or I will going. So it's very difficult. And then they start using their L1 and they said, no, teacher, this is what I meant. So it's a prediction based in fact, but they will use another future form. And it's really very difficult. And one has to look into both their culture and also the context of the language that they're using, if a teacher is to fully understand. So even when you explain to them, no, this is your perception, or no, this is the context in which you're coming from, they still have to master that. So even in the B1, B2 level, and even for C1, they still make those mistakes. So as I was listening to this interactions with Neil, I remembered all my lessons with them, and this by far has been the most challenging for Japanese learners. Culture comes into play as well when teaching the future forms. And I think that's about it.
So we've got culture, as I understand it from your explanation. Thank you for sharing that with us, Rowena. Being based on a kind of a linguistic culture, but also perhaps a classroom culture. You know,
Yes.
the fear of not. In my experience of working with Japanese learners, there is a great deal of desire of saving face and not
Yes.
wanting to look that, not wanting to open up to the possibility of making mistakes.
Mhm. I
Is
agree.
is there in Japanese, because I know there is in Arabic, any issues in terms of how the future is perceived differently? So, for example, I think, am I right, if you've got any other Saudi or Middle Eastern teachers with us, that in
We
Britain,
have a Lebanese teacher.
we have Lebanese, but I'm not sure if it's the same, that the future is in front of us in our cultures, but in fact, in Arabic culture, it's behind us because we can't see it. Is there anything similar that actually time is considered differently in Japanese culture, Rowena? I don't know if you can comment on that.
Mm, uh, they don't see the future tense the way we normally would see it, like in front of us, or something far away, like years in terms of time. Uh, it is really tied up to a culture that they have. So, and when they do express the future, there is some sort of commitment to do that a particular action that they are planning in that particular time frame. So honor when it comes to keeping their word, in the same way that they value not losing their face. They're very careful with that. Mhm.
So in that respect, in not wanting to break honor and your commitment
Mhm.
to someone, you might be presupposed to a way of thinking that is around certainty and definite, based on, because I've said something, therefore it's certain, and
It
therefore
has to be done.
conceptual
Mhm.
framework of will predominating.
Mhm.
Because culturally,
Yes.
I don't want to suggest that there is any uncertainty in what I've said, because then I'm breaking my
Yes.
honor to you.
That's true.
That's fascinating, Rowena. Thank you so much for sharing those thoughts with us. I know it's always a bit, what's the word? Can be a bit nerve-wracking coming onto the microphone with a group of people you've never met before, but we value your contribution.
Well done.
Thank you, Rowena.
Thank you so much also.
And we'd also welcome contributions from anyone else within the participants today. We've got about 10 minutes left. Christina, what, carrying on from what Rowena was saying about cultural attitudes to futurity, your thoughts being in Lebanon in terms of how students perceive the future through a cultural lens rather than a linguistic lens, and again, this thought about behind you, in front of you. Anything you could share? Or it might, Christine, you might want to switch your video off.
I won't be. Oh, sorry, my fault. I don't know what's happening. Normally I have excellent connection. Just today it happened. I'm actually, I'm not sure about the linguistic aspect of the language. I do know about the cultural aspect, in the sense that it is more of a question of you don't want the ambiguity. You don't want to know that your teacher is not the font of all knowledge. You have to have this certainty from your teacher.
Right. So in that respect, teacher kind of opening up at about kind of, well, you know, this is all about choice and being very fluffy may actually...
No, this does not work.
Might be unwelcome. Interesting.
Yes, and this is something very interesting, I'm sorry, is that when we try to teach using this communicative approach and this more fluid way of looking at language, we actually have to explain to our learners what we're doing and why we're doing it. So we actually have pamphlets that says, why are we doing this way? So we have to explain why the teacher will not tell you the answer. You have to tell them, you have to justify for reading, for listening, for everything. So it's a culture shock, but at the same time, something very interesting is that shouldn't we also adapt a little bit more to our culture instead of trying to impose?
Right. Could you perhaps explain a little bit more about how that might work in terms of the teaching of futurity then? How one's culturally adept as a teacher rather than imposing a Eurocentric model on future forms?
I mean, it might not be like in Japan, but the idea that the teacher will lose face is very important. The teacher is seen as the font of all knowledge. And therefore, coming in and going, well, you're right, it could be this or that, would be an issue. So I think in order to teach futurity, the teacher has to be prepared, for example, in the, what do you call that, in the instructions, to say more than one possibility. There is more than one possibility. Now, it will, please be prepared to justify. So you don't lose face, but at the same time, you allow this ambiguity to be there. So you're not teaching wrong, which unfortunately does happen, is that in the sense that because you don't want people to go, well, he didn't really know what he was talking about, she wasn't really sure. At the end, we end up not teaching the fact that it can be two things.
So in terms of that, there was that discussion in the English language teaching journal between Jeremy Harmer and Bax about culturally appropriate teaching being more important than communicative language teaching, and therefore that as a teacher we adjust ourselves to the dominant culture or cultures of the context in which we are teaching, in order to be able to be sensitive to and as effective as possible for the learners that we're teaching. In other words, not only does futurity resist a binary right or wrong, but likewise context-specific teaching resists one way to do it or a wrong way to do it, but a culturally appropriate way to do it. So in that respect, if we go back to what Rowena was saying, that we might want to sort of make it clear to Japanese learners of English that in a Japanese to Japanese context, this is how it works. But there are other contexts which might look at the future in a different way and make them aware of how it is possible to be different without destabilizing the cultural norm of the Japanese learner. I'm conscious we've got about 4 or 5 minutes left, and I know that we wanted to talk a little bit about what came up in the second part of the discussion, which was the inductive, deductive side of things. Now, my kind of feeling for years was that inductive, we show the students some language. It might be they do a reading or they do a listening and they understand the text and its meaning, and then they get given some sentences from the reading or the listening, and then there are some quizzes to get them to thinking about what the language meant. So it might be some future forms from a listening, from a dialogue, then they match it to the meaning, and then they kind of develop their understanding. And inductive, you're leading the students into an understanding of the grammar. And then we start reading that there is an evidence base that this actually, at lower levels particularly, is not always effective, and that in fact all of that kind of clever student-centered leading them towards into the language might actually just confuse them, and be far better off being teacher-fronted and saying, this is how you talk about in English. As a teacher trainer,
yes, that's the
how do you navigate the inductive, deductive side of things, with reference to future forms, perhaps?
Yes. So what I wanted to say is that it's very important to understand that we need to develop as teachers all the research that's coming up. We shouldn't be stuck on what we already know. So there's a lot of second language acquisition research that's coming out saying that actually, you know what? Explaining in clear terms the way it was done maybe 60, 17 years ago will be better for lower levels. And we have to be willing to try something new, just because we have been trained, and that's my case, most probably yours also, because not just because we've been trained in doing it in a certain way, the way inductive was king, that doesn't mean it's correct. What's important is that it's learning. We have to subordinate teaching to learning. Learning is the goal, and we have to be able to develop, which means as teachers, as teacher trainers, we have to keep researching, we have to keep reading, we have to be willing to move and be flexible the same way our learners are. What do you think?
So for those of you who perhaps were only catching bits of what Christina said, I'll try to summarize it very briefly, that it's important that anyone involved in teacher education, that we remain open to new ways of doing things, and that where there is an evidence base, which there now is, that inductive doesn't necessarily work well for every learner, that we may, as teachers, prefer one way, but we need to be open to doing things a different way if the evidence tells us that it is more effective. And in the case of teaching grammar, direct instruction, teaching the students the rule and asking them to apply it may well, particularly at lower levels, be easier and quicker. Christina then asked me my view on this, and I think, Christina, I would very much agree with you that my teaching is changing. So on the slides that we saw in the video of the anti-grammar grammar book, now to be fair, that's a high-level book, although it really was there for intermediate and above. If I was teaching a low-level class, I think I would now be inclined to situate the language through perhaps telling a story that was about me or my friends, much as I did at the beginning of today's class. I might just see if I can get the students in tune with the language by doing something like that grammar dictation. But I think if I was in a monolingual context, I might then give the students the rules in L1, ask them to apply them, check it, then re-explain the rules in L2, so they get the benefit of both
Of the
languages.
input.
But be very mindful of the potential for using inductive as a review maybe a couple of weeks later. Do you remember when we talked about is ing for fixed plans? I'm visiting, I'm eating in my favorite restaurant tonight. Do you remember that story? Tonight we're going to review it. Here are some sentences I'd like you to match the meaning, and they do an inductive thing. So I think my teaching, I find it hard to move away from inductive because it kind of feels right. Oh, the students are having to really concentrate and work hard. But the fact is, in doing that, we might be losing some of them, and that's never a good thing.
Yeah, the cognitive load is too much at times. But also allowing people, don't forget that the L1 doesn't have to come from you. It can come from the peers. And this will allow an element of peer teaching, you know, that maybe change the rule, as in go in L2, then allow them to talk about it in L1. Within the groups, this will allow peer teaching to happen. So there will be an element of cognitive load being lessened, but at the same time having more of an SS interaction.
Christina, I think I'm right in saying that it's now 7:30.
And I'm eating out, and now my internet connection is fine. I apologize, this has never happened.
The internet connection is fine, but you're leaving us shortly to have a wonderful dinner. I wish you a great time. Can I thank all of the participants
so much
who stayed with us throughout this last hour and a half together.